Good morning. We are here for a really terrific webinar asking the question, are you an inventor or are you an entrepreneur? My name is Joanne Geer and I am the Executive Director of the Biopharma Research Council. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about us. We are a nonprofit association designed to bring people together from scientists to engineers, IT professionals across all the different silos of biomedical research. Our focus is really on knowledge sharing and collaboration on the research side. This particular series, Startup Spin-Offs and Stories, is our way of exploring commercialization. We have a good archive online with recordings from previous sessions that focus, and this one too will have a lot of examples from the university tech transfer perspective. We have actually just booked one speaker from Merck and another from Johnson & Johnson, so future episodes will include the perspective from the industry side. I'm just going to go through these quickly, and we've got some wonderful programs coming up. Some of them we have completed and the recordings are online. We're coming up on our microbiome update, which is at Kean University and their Institute for Life Science Entrepreneurship in October. And we're coming to Durham. This is our year for the Triangle Biotech Research Symposium, and our theme this year is D3D, Data, Drugs, Diagnostics. Followed up by a two-day program on companion diagnostics, which will be in New Jersey. And the big event we're doing this year is a regional pharma manufacturing expo. We are partnering with a number of really interesting groups to do some training workshops on change management, handling FDA inspections, and so on. This is looking to be a really wonderful program. Dave Pollard from Merck is our keynote for that event. You are welcome to enter questions in the box at any time. We're going to, in a moment, Neha, who is co-chairing this series, will be introducing all of the concept and our speakers. And after their presentation, we'll have a nice long discussion time. And take it away, Neha.
Hi, good morning everybody, and welcome to this webinar series of startup spin-offs and stories. We've had a lot of interesting speakers from all over the country, primarily from tech transfer offices, but today is an interesting and a different webinar. We are looking at, we are asking the question that Joanne mentioned, if you're an inventor or an entrepreneur. And to help us and to give us some guide points in that, we have with us two very interesting speakers, Russell Thomas and Andy Schwab. Just to let you know a little bit more about this topic, well, it's just, it will help individuals understand the important differences between entrepreneurship and inventing so that you can organize your startup or early stage teams more effectively for commercial success. And you have some experts to give you more ideas on this. Russell Thomas is a co-founder and CEO of Nirvana Sciences, which is a spin-out of NC State University, commercializing new fluorescent dyes with ultra-narrow emissions to enable super diagnostic and imaging tests. This is his second fluorescent dye-related company, and he has been earlier involved at the NC State University as the Director of New Venture Services, where he has been responsible for increasing the number of and the quality of the spin-outs coming out of that university. Joining us in the discussion is Andy Schwab, who's a successful entrepreneur with over 20 years of experience building startup companies. He has been a mentor and advisor to over 30 companies throughout his career, and he's part of many boards and committees designed to vet technology and executive teams. He is actually the president of First Flight Venture Center, which is an incubator of about 40 startup companies based at the Research Triangle Park in North Carolina. And he has, of course, in this huge span of his career, seen a lot of teams succeed as well as fail. So he was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award from the Triangle Business Network, supporting early stage startups in North Carolina. We also have today with us Claudia, who will be joining us for the discussion. She has a career of over 30 years in the diagnostic industry and has included, which includes a lot of leadership positions in R&D, business development, and marketing. She is also a certified professional in PMP and quality system auditing. She has experience in management of a variety of business critical programs such as new product development programs from conception to commercialization to product acquisitions to functional department integrations and remediation of quality system and regulatory audit deficiencies. She's now working as an independent consultant, and she is using all her expertise to assist startups and small device companies. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Russell, and we'll hear more from him. Over to you, Russell.
Thank you very much. And just to confirm, I believe everybody can see my screen now. So this is an important topic for both Andy and myself. When I was involved in the technology commercialization program at NC State, and then when I moved over into the tech transfer office working with new ventures and spinouts, this topic of really understanding the difference between, are you an inventor or are you an entrepreneur is really, really important. And I found that the topic or the question was oftentimes not given enough introspective thought by individuals taking the leap. And so we kind of built this slide deck to provide information for scientific professionals, who are really contemplating becoming involved in the commercialization process. We've seen a lot of inventors try to make this leap and become entrepreneurs, many times some of them thinking and becoming the startup CEO. Some of them make it, but unfortunately a lot of them do not make the leap. And so sometimes it's the technology, but often it's not. So this slide deck is really an attempt from us to really help individuals understand the differences between entrepreneurship and inventorship. There are some overlapping skill sets that are quite important, but it's really just information to help everybody on how they can effectively integrate themselves into early stage teams and the commercialization process, and hopefully reduce any personal stress and team conflict that can come about. And also we'll introduce the First Flight Venture Center here in Research Triangle Park, which is a premier science incubator, a science spin-out incubator. So the agenda today on the third slide here is we're just going to go through some basic definitions. We're going to talk a little bit about the dogma that's out there. A lot of people have a misconception that entrepreneurs are born, and that's just simply not the case. We're going to talk about the differences between entrepreneurs and inventors, and we're really going to spend our time focusing on the characteristics and attributes of entrepreneurs. As we understood, most of you are probably wearing more of the inventor cap, and so we're going to bias our information towards the other side of the chasm, the entrepreneurial side. So then we're going to move into kind of how the label of entrepreneur is a bit flexible, meaning sometimes everybody and their brother and sister can call themselves an entrepreneur, but really it's a self-determined label, but it's kind of useful to spend a little bit of time talking about that. We talk about some of the unique attributes of entrepreneurs. Then I'm going to cover 3 patterns of startup CEOs that I see, and some of them have become very successful, but just to give everybody a sense of, a couple of different perspectives. And then we're going to talk about those startup CEOs' responsibilities, and then Andy's going to introduce First Flight Venture Center. During the course of this presentation, Andy will add some really great insight into the slide deck at about 4 or 5 different slides throughout this process. So something that most people do not take the time to do when they're really contemplating getting involved in an early stage startup company is really understand the difference between what is an entrepreneur and what is an inventor. And so I don't need to read this slide, but I want to emphasize that an entrepreneur is really one who organizes and manages the enterprise, and the inventor is one who invents. And so on one hand, this is a very simple, common sense understanding. On the other hand, I find it very important for everybody to read the definitions side by side so that they can really internalize that an entrepreneur really normally has different skill sets than an inventor. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. This question of are entrepreneurs born or are they made? So for 50 years, there has been this perspective that people have this special personality called an entrepreneurship personality. And academics and many others assumed that entrepreneurs had a very high need for achievement, they had high risk tolerances, and basically the intent to become an entrepreneur was grounded in static personality traits that oftentimes individuals were born with and actually not developed. But over the course of many, many years, academic research into the entrepreneurial personality has really concluded that there's no systematic differences in personality traits between entrepreneurs and the general population. Okay, entrepreneurs simply don't display a higher risk tolerance than other members of the general population. And so from a business entrepreneurship research perspective, it was really considered a big failure, and it really led to a decade-long kind of hiatus and a rethinking of this topic. And I really bring this up because having talked with a lot of different scientists, engineers, and even entrepreneurial faculty at a lot of different places, there's still the, I guess, the continued argument that there are special individuals with special personality traits that become entrepreneurs, and it really is just not the case. Anybody, you know, if you do look at kind of a Myers-Briggs, Keirsey type personality, there's just not many differences. So in the midst of kind of this rethinking, Busenitz and Barney really came up with the notion that entrepreneurs don't display higher risk tolerances because they actually don't perceive that there's higher risk. And this is really, really important when we're talking about identifying entrepreneurial opportunities. And so enter in the cognitive approach that entrepreneurs think differently than the general population and then use a higher propensity of biases and heuristics. They tend to not see these opportunities as risky. They have a bit of an overconfidence bias because of their insight, and they tend to use a lot of representative heuristics, i.e. they see patterns in the external environment that others may not. And so they feel this unique insight gives them the opportunity to uniquely solve a problem. And in essence, they can thread the needle when others cannot. And so Professor Scott Shane wrote a nice paper talking about, prior knowledge and the discovery of entrepreneurial opportunities, and he went through and evaluated 8 different cases of potential commercialization applications. This was written back in 2008, but it was a really nice paper of how somebody's previous knowledge and insight and recognition of patterns can lead to entrepreneurial insight of new business opportunities. So, a little more refined support for the cognitive approach. What tends to make a big difference in entrepreneurial success is the belief in one's ability to succeed. This drives one's interest to pursue an entrepreneurial activity. And really, the self-efficacy is molded through prior experience, family experiences, mentoring relationships, and much, much more. But the belief that you can become an entrepreneur is highly important and sometimes misleading. So there are many unique attributes of entrepreneurs, and we can go very academically, or in our case, Andy and I, a couple of the key things that we see as some of the real important attributes of successful entrepreneurs. And one of the, I guess, patterns that I see in successful entrepreneurs is really that they tend to think in problem and solution sets. Now, on one hand, understanding a problem and solution template is what I have identified here, is including, understanding the context, the forces affecting that context, the problem, which is fundamentally the real or the root problem, the associated solution that needs to be created to solve that problem, the resulting context that is created once the solution is placed, and its supporting rationale are really, really important to the success of an entrepreneur. And the individuals that we know who become a serial entrepreneur with multiple successes really understand how the technology has an interplay with within all of these different components of a problem and solution set. But also, entrepreneurs tend to have an extreme passion. The work is fun. It's got to be, because it can tend to be very frustrating, and you can go through long periods with without much success. They tend to organize and advance and succeed in a world that's awash with incomplete information. They understand how to formulate a business strategy that is actually a plan to win, not just a plan to get there, but fundamentally a plan to win, and create financial value for the company and its stockholders and investors. They tend to be quite impatient, i.e. tomorrow is always better, or excuse me, today is always better than tomorrow, and you will consistently hear war stories from entrepreneurs about someone saying, this couldn't be done in 2 months, but my team was able to get it done within 30 days, and that's a really important mindset to have. Entrepreneurs tend to think both on a big scale as well as on a small scale, meaning that when they convey information about their business opportunity or perhaps the technological advantages of their product concept to individuals, they can convey that at both a high conceptual level to perhaps layman individuals who do not have a scientific background in that area, or they can also talk at the very detailed level to people who do understand the science or do understand the market space extremely well. They tend to be realists or optimists, but seldom do entrepreneurs be pessimists. And so we've run into a fair amount of individuals who have an interest to become entrepreneurs and even startup entrepreneurs, but their natural personality categorization is one of a pessimist, and that's just a really hard place to start to get people interested in your technology and tell a compelling story of your vision. Entrepreneurs tend to understand the differences between assumptions and beliefs and facts, and they know when to validate beliefs so they become facts. And this is a really, really important skill. We'll talk a little bit more about that. They're not afraid of failure or embarrassment, willingness to leave their comfort zone. And lastly, they handle stock dilution with usually decreasing amounts of company control. And this really sounds like another simple situation, but I've had many, many conversations with technologists who have very high expectations for their technology. And for that, they really do not see or understand why, when the company is set up, how their stock is going to be diluted and how that's going to affect control. And some individuals just cannot get past that. So some of the unique attributes of inventors, which for example nicely overlap with that of an entrepreneur, is inventors often are excellent problem solvers. And as I mentioned on the previous slide, problem solving is fundamentally key to entrepreneurial success. And also they, going down to the bottom, they typically underestimate the resources needed to develop and launch a successful product. And I think this stems from their perspective often is viewed as a minimal viable product, and many inventors see an analytical prototype as viable to their peers. But going past that, you've got the alpha, beta prototypes, and eventually a commercial prototype with technical manuals, repairmen, robust protocols, all these other things, all these other business activities and support systems that need to be put in place to make a product a success. Now, many of you, this might be less of an issue with scientists in the biopharma space, given your high level of understanding of the FDA process, but nonetheless, it's a really important issue. Also, the last item, inventors tend to really enjoy tinkering, and often they have a need to understand all the different properties and mechanisms of their science and their technology, and a lot of times this can take them down irrelevant roads. And so one really needs to stay focused on just the important properties towards commercial success. And so with that, I'm going to turn this over to Andy, and he's going to add some additional insight to this slide.
I don't think you want to change presenters. I'll just speak to this a little bit. So I believe that a lot of the folks that come into our facility here are inventors that have obviously some great science behind their offering. The challenge is that oftentimes inventors think the science is the hard problem that needs to be solved, not necessarily building a product and bringing it to market. They think the sales and marketing effort is, if you will, the simpler part of the process. So a lot of times we see folks that come in and say, you know, we just need a bunch of money, $1 million, and a sales and marketing team, and off we go. But a lot of times that's not the case. As Russell mentioned earlier, there's a lot of elements of going from a prototype device or a proof of concept kind of offering into a commercial space. And we also see a lot of people that have what we call platform technologies, where they could go into a variety of different markets and a variety of different use cases. And the challenge is, what's the entry or beachhead market? A lot of times inventors here seem to be driven by inbound interest rather than analyzing the best market entry point. And the reason for that is that's easier. It's always easier when someone's coming to you and saying, hey, I'd like you to develop this for a particular market. But a lot of times that's not the best entry market for your product. And we see companies spend a lot of money and a lot of time, even if they're paid by an outside customer, to develop their technology for a particular market segment that may not be the easiest segment to go down. For those of you that are doing medical devices, a classic example would be a customer is pushing you down a route that's going to be a PMA regulatory process rather than a 510K process. So it may be that what they want for their particular application spaces is going to be a much more costly and time-involved process than bringing a broader product to market, and it may be a simpler product to market that would be in the 510K space. So that's just a classic example of the different kind of thinking that you have to apply when you're really an entrepreneur versus being an inventor. And Russell, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Andy. So Andy and I see a lot of people throw around the word entrepreneur, and we've really just come to the opinion that it's the label is quite flexible, and it's really kind of self-determining as to whether you want to call yourself an entrepreneur. But in essence, for us, it's individuals who take a leap of faith to capture a business opportunity and often place significant personal assets, career trajectories at risk. An entrepreneur tends to be identified with someone who's often got kind of champion qualities, but ultimately it's a self-labeling choice. And we've had individuals who call themselves entrepreneurs, who have started 5 companies. We have individuals who call themselves entrepreneurs and they've come in and the company already had 20 employees and they grew it to 150 employees. We've had people call themselves entrepreneurs and say that you can only call yourself an entrepreneur if you've had a successful exit. Not sure if that's right, but in the end, it's a flexible categorization, and everybody needs to make that personal decision as to when they want to call themselves that title. But going to what actually makes an entrepreneur a little bit further, I really consider it someone who is heavily involved in an early stage venture that is involved in either attracting resources for that company, developing or delivering a differentiated customer valued product, that creates a self-sustaining entity, or strategically impacts the company by building multiple parts of a viable company. And so some of you may not be familiar with Michael Porter's value chain, but it's a useful model. And what Dr. Porter had done is he broke up an organization into 5 primary activities and 4 supporting activities. For many of us on this webinar, including myself, the supporting activity of technology development tends to be the primary activity of these early stage science-based startup companies. But the model is really useful for everybody just to understand, and it, in our opinion, is indicative if you have participated in an early stage company and brought significant value to developing one or more of these activities, then I think the entrepreneurial label is really useful and you've earned it. But this notion of sorry. I'm going to have Andy's going to add some additional insight here.
So I think some important things to understand in what makes an entrepreneur and how heavily you're involved in early stage ventures. It's very important to understand corporate bylaws and infrastructure. I mean, if you're building something for yourself and you're the only one that needs to be involved, you can own 100% of it, and if you have all the money to finance it and you have all the resources and knowledge to do the supply chain, do the regulatory piece, do everything yourself, that's all well and good. But what I really like about corporations, whether they be LLCs or C Corps, is it's all about building value, shareholder value. And so one of your roles as an entrepreneur is what types of relationships, what kind of holes do you have on your team, what kind of financing do you need to put together to raise the inherent value of the technology you've created so that it can be realized in another way. And one of the things we see a lot of people get all caught up in is what's my ownership piece and what is fair? Probably one of the biggest questions I get asked, usually when there's 3 or 4 people involved, is how much ownership should I have versus my other team members? I mean, I came up with the idea, or I've spent 10 years researching this. Fair is very, very dependent upon the opportunity and the skill sets of the individuals involved, and what are they bringing strategically to create shareholder value. I mean, I think, as Russell pointed out here, the technology development is one important piece, but it's just one piece of a much larger set of attributes that have to be brought together to make something have great value. So just want you to keep that in mind as we go through this discussion.
Thank you, Andy. So to the next slide, the punchline and really the really important, I guess, question to ask oneself is, you know, if you're contemplating moving from the inventorship role to an entrepreneurial role, you know, can you fundamentally make that leap? And if you can, how long is it going to take you to develop those entrepreneurial skill sets? So fundamentally, you know, there are many people, including myself, who are solely entrepreneurs, meaning they can execute and grow someone else's scientific idea into a business. There are some people who can make this leap and can be both inventors and entrepreneurs, but there are many people who are solely inventors and not entrepreneurs. And so, you know, that's really the crux of what we wanted to talk through today in this webinar. Unfortunately, there are some times that there are inventors who don't understand or don't properly categorize themselves, and they do firmly believe that they have the entrepreneurial skill sets to make their company successful, but this leads to a lot of personal frustration and oftentimes a lack of success. So we just have really a simple Venn diagram that we wanted to use to kind of show the rarity of, you know, individuals who possess both the inventorship and entrepreneurial skill sets, and Andy's going to add some additional insight into this one as well.
So I think one of the challenges for people coming from the science side, where they've been working diligently on the technology for many years, you tend to get very comfortable with your technology and see a lot of the business activities that have to go around it as something they don't either want to focus on, or they feel there's the next step in moving the technology forward is a higher priority to them than necessarily worrying about what they consider more mundane commercialization issues. And coming directly from academia, if you've been there for a long time, can be challenging because you've been focusing and your emphasis has been on pushing the technology forward, not necessarily understanding where it fits in the market and how best to bring it to market. So a challenge is if you are an inventor that comes from an academic environment and don't necessarily have tremendous domain experience in the industry that you want to bring your product to, you may not understand or may oversimplify pricing issues, customer economic drivers, things like that, that have a big impact on how you move a technology opportunity all the way to a commercial product. We've had a couple companies that have been spun out of university environment here where they've been student-based, and by definition, if they're typically student-based and this is their first career opportunity, they by definition lack the domain expertise necessary to understand what the drivers are in a particular market. And so they tend to be inbound customer focused. Once again, they tend to focus on customers that come to them rather than evaluating the market and figuring out where the best place to go. I think another key point here is we really stress this to all of our companies here. Market validation only comes from customers. It doesn't come from winning business plan contests. It's not how much money you raise. We've had a number of companies that have won 5 or 6 competitions, business plan competitions that they apply to both at their university and broader places, and they come to me and say, well, we've been validated because we won, out of 50 companies pitching. That's not validation for your business. The only validation for a business is actual customers paying for a product and doing it repeatably and in a forecastable way. That is the only measure of validation. If you raise $10 million, you raise $100 million, that does not mean you're validated. That means someone believes there's a market opportunity that if you were to execute properly on the business side, you would be able to achieve the value that they're seeking from that whole exercise.
Thank you, Andy. So I'm going to move through these next 3 slides fairly quickly, but in my experience, I see 3 patterns of startup CEOs, all labeled entrepreneurs, obviously, but I've not really seen this illustrated or discussed in other formats, but the 3 that I see is, the first is the individual, the person who is both an inventor and entrepreneur, who is customer problem and product solution centric, meaning they have a deep and unique understanding of the technology. They can understand customer needs well and translate this into the design and development of the product. And they're typically heavily involved in technology development, but they really have a unique skill set to dial in what we would call the technology product market linkage and really develop a viable product that solves a customer need. And so oftentimes inventors who are heavily involved in the development of their technologies, some of them can be extremely good in this role because they have a very good problem and solution perspective. The next pattern that I see is an entrepreneur who is networking and team building and fundraising focused, and these individuals, I call them really in essence, they're kind of deal makers, but they really understand how to take their market insight and identify this connection between product offerings, customer need, and investors who have an interest in pursuing that opportunity, and they tend to be very technology agnostic, meaning they'll go out and find the best technology to solve that problem. And then the last topic is an entrepreneur who is, I call them a technology commercialization expert. They really they know how to go from the ground up technology and develop a very comprehensive commercialization plan. I would argue that I probably fit in this 3rd category. And a couple of the responsibilities, and you can review these slides a little bit more in depthly on your own. At really the pre-seed stage, the before startup, startup CEOs really need to create a vision, start to gather those resources for that startup, find that optimal technology product market linkage, build that business model, start to assemble the team, create momentum, and in the seed stage, it's sell the vision, attract more resources, and fundamentally create tremendous amounts of momentum. And lastly, the CEO, the startup CEO's responsibility is fundamentally to build an organization of people who can develop a product and take that product or service to the marketplace and create real customer value. So with that, I think we'll just go ahead and turn it over to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andy and Russell, for your insights into this. And actually, I have this one question which was coming to my mind while you were speaking, as to what exactly is the appropriate stage that, let's say, an inventor thinks about a startup company. I mean, I know that there are a lot of scientists in the audience, and I'm sure all of them have this question coming up at most of the times in their mind. So if you could throw some light on it.
So I think I'll take this. I think, you know, obviously earlier is better. You need to decide, is this something that you want to personally be involved in the commercialization effort, or are you more interested in seeing the technology be used to benefit mankind in some way? So we see two different types of inventors at universities, some that are content to just keep advancing the technology, and they just would like to see someone take it and make it available to the general public, and they don't really care if they make money on it per se. Its end value to the general population is more important to them than the economics of what they're building. And in the other case, they're economically driven. If you're economically driven and want to realize the value from what you've created, and you believe that that is of interest to you, those are the critical things you need to decide. And you need to decide those as soon as you can, because that will drive your decision process of, do you just want the university to license it to somebody, or do you want to license it yourself and try to bring it to market?
You know, I excuse me for joining the conversation, Joanne Gear. I think, Andy, you had an example of a company that can help illustrate the roadmap for a successful process. Is that something you could share with us now?
Sure. I mean, we've been fortunate at First Flight over the years. We've had quite a few companies come through here. I mean, the largest one that graduated from here and became a public company was United Therapeutics. Typically, companies go through a meandering road from their original idea to what becomes eventually what they're known for. I mean, and United Therapeutics is no exception. So they start out in the orphan drug space, but some of the things that they start out in isn't what they eventually got traction for in the marketplace. They still do orphan drugs, but they were able to pierce that major step from taking the technology that existed. Now, they were licensing technology out of the university. Some of the key founders actually came from more of the entrepreneurial side. They were successful in the satellite industry, communication industry, before getting involved in the drug discovery space. So sometimes having someone that has the entrepreneurial skills coupled with great technology leaders that came out of the university were able to realize the full value of what was there. So United Therapeutics was definitely one of them. One of the others that we're very proud of right now is Ginger Dozier from Biomason. Ginger was an architect who's developed a technology for building bricks or growing bricks using a microorganism approach, similar to the process of corals, formation of coral reefs. And she has demonstrated not only that she can raise capital for this, but how to take a bench-level prototype of this capability and start to scale it so that it could be fully realized as a new building process, a new building material with reduced carbon impact to the environment, because there's no clay firing needed to cure the bricks. I mean, so the bricks are actually grown rather than clay fired. So those are some great examples of companies that have started with an idea and some technology and been able to be fairly successful.
Beautiful. I think Claudia had a question. Then we have some questions coming in. Sorry, Claudia, I just want to encourage everyone to enter your questions in the box. We're going to take audience questions in a moment.
Okay, thank you, Joanne. So for both Andy and Russell, for entrepreneurs or inventors to really understand customer needs and user needs and ensuring they're addressing those and not just saying, well, I know what they are because I've researched the market, you know, what are some of the strategies that First Flight is using and also your startups to ensure that customer needs are truly understood and researched in the beginning?
Yeah, so the most successful strategy I've seen so far and that I'm starting to see more and more of, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the I-Corps program at NSF or NIH, started at NSF, but it's based upon the lean startup methodology that came out of Stanford and Steve Blank. But it forces groups of people that want to form a startup to go out and actually talk to 100 stakeholders. Not just talk to them, visit as many of them as possible, and fully explore what are the attributes of how their technology would fit and work in that particular environment for those particular customers. And they assemble all that information over a 90 to 120 day period and use that as the basis for a go, no-go decision on moving forward as a company, or deciding whether or not this is more of a licensing opportunity rather than a strategy for building a company or a big enough market to build a company. And so it really focuses on the market dynamics and talking to particular stakeholders, and 80 to 100 seems like a pretty good number to start with. And a lot of inventors will tell you, I don't have time to go talk to 80 or 100 people. I mean, my God, the logistics of that, it'll take forever. This is a very necessary step unless you come from the industry itself and understand the economics of that industry.
Terrific. Thanks so much.
Nia, would you like to go another round, or shall I go to the audience questions?
Yes, I have one more question, which is probably a lot of startup entrepreneurs are thinking about, is what was your, for instance, Russell, what was your first product like, and is it still the same compared to what you started with? Essentially meaning, assuming that there are a lot of modifications and changes to a product that happens during its lifetime for it to be ready for commercialization. Just trying to figure out what's the pattern, let's say.
Good question. So one of the reasons why I kind of wanted to go through and kind of illustrate some of the differences in different startup CEOs' skill sets is my skill set is one of, I think, a very thorough technology commercialization analysis. And so I've been involved in a wide variety of different technologies, software, IT hardware, just a lot of different areas of science. And what I understand is the process to really understand a technology's capabilities, how that can be manifested into a variety of different products, and those different products then have different opportunities in different market spaces, and so that, you know, those technology product market linkages have to be analyzed, and you analyze those by a variety of market research in terms of, you know, primary conversations, as Andy alluded to, a lot of conversations. I am of the opinion that you do not know your optimal technology product market linkage until you've had 150 conversations with stakeholders in the market. And
wow, he's even more hardcore than I was.
So why?
I think part of that is if you don't bore yourself after 150 times, then you may have the juice it will take to tell the story, you know, 1,500 times in the course of building your company.
Well, this is the situation where, you know, more upfront planning prevents a lot of mistakes down the road. And, you know, talking to people and really understanding there's a time element involved, but it's actually fairly inexpensive to do. I mean, and it's a lot less expensive than having to completely redevelop your product platform because you didn't understand your customers' value drivers. And so I've tended to spend a lot of time in the commercialization analysis phase to really understand it. And the two companies that I founded, I have to say, both have been spot on from an entry market standpoint, the right product for the right entry market. And then once you get that beachhead established, then you start to focus on what are the second and third, opportunities associated with the platform. But, this is one of those situations where a lot of inventors just undervalue the market research component. And they think, oh, I've spoken with 7, 8 people and they're kind of saying the same thing, so therefore let's just do it. And that is insufficient if you really want to hit the nail right on the head for success.
I think I want to point something else out here. A lot of entrepreneurs or technology-based entrepreneurs think you can outsource this function. They think they can just get someone else to do it. I can't tell you the number of times someone said, well, I'll get the business school at XYZ to put 4 students on it, or I'll go hire an outside expert. You really need that technology expert as part of the team in this process, because you're trying to translate specific capabilities that only the technology person probably fully grasps, but you will have to get that linkage from your dialogue or conversation with your customer. Outsourcing it to someone else, you're going to miss where that critical linkage is, where your value proposition is probably most strongest. And it may not be what you thought it was based on the full capabilities of your technology. It might be, your interests are on one side of the technology, but it may be a complementary part of the technology that's most interesting to the market.
And I think also continuing to revalidate that customer need throughout the design development project is key, because things can change over time.
Oh, we've seen that here. We had a company here that was in the emergency medical market. They were developing a on-the-go or on-demand chilled saline solution for emergency medicine for heart attack victims. In the 2 years that it took them to get their patents, get their 510K, get their design done, actually manufacture their product, the market shifted in terms of recommendations for emergency care docs on how much chilled saline to do in the field versus at an actual hospital setting. And they felt that the market had changed significantly enough that they decided to sell their technology to another player rather than continue as a separate company. So over 2 years, yes, those assumptions and that market analysis needs to go on because markets change.
I like this slide that's here, and I'll give you an opportunity if you wish to address it, but I have a good question that is a lovely dovetails with our conversation. This comes from the audience. How do actually it's going to be a 2-part question. So one part of it is that platform for doing the outreach to 150 people, right? If one has an association with ICOR, for example, if one has an association with First Flight, I would imagine that is a great help, that just being able to do the outreach on behalf, I'm part of First Flight and this is where I'm coming from. I've found the front door. I guess that's what I'm saying. Somehow it really helps to find the front door to the resource closest to you and most relevant to your business that can sort of deputize you and support you, even whether there's money or space or anything else. But to have an engagement larger than yourself, I think really is an important first step. And dovetailing to the question, how do the speakers manage inventors who do not get it that the technology is an accelerant to create a product, not the product itself? So it's the people side of your business.
Yeah, I think it's like anything else. Some people get it and are trainable. Some people have to go down blind alleys. I mean, I'm working with a company right now where they actually came out of a university in the Northeast. I won't mention which one, but they've relocated here. The 2 entrepreneurs felt that, or inventors/entrepreneurs, felt that they had enough inbound interest that they it was in the medical diagnostic space, blood diagnostic space, that they could do this themselves and they could do it their way. They beat their heads for 4 years going down certain product pathways that have not been fruitful, and now they've come to the realization they need to take a different approach. So it's one of those things, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make them drink it. Some get it right away. I have a litmus test that I use for some people that want me to get more directly involved. I had a leading cardiologist at a local university who claimed he had the best products in sliced bread for lab management, and is this visual lab management product that was so unique in the marketplace. He even went to business school and won 3 different business plan competitions on his idea and was using it in his lab, and he used certain expressions in trying to talk with me that tend to set me off. He said he had a whole bunch of potential customers ready to stroke a check. And that usually causes me to do what I do with my children when they tell me everybody's doing it. Okay, name 3. And what do you mean? I said, give me 3 names. He said, what do you mean, like email? No, I said, right now, give me 3 names of people who are willing to write a check for this product. I'm going to call them while we're sitting here, and if they won't write a large check for this, you've got nothing. And he owned 100% of this company. He wanted to build a team. I told him, you should own 5% of this company, because this wasn't his full-time job. This was just something that he was doing on the side from his cardiology business, where he is an expert and where he is very valuable. And my litmus test for him was, okay, you need to give up 80% of the company tomorrow. Now, the friend who sent me to him said, oh my God, did you tell this leading cardiologist he had to give up 80% of his company or you wouldn't work with him? I didn't want 80% of his company. I just needed to know he was willing to give it up and willing to understand what his role was going to be with regard to product development and commercialization. If he wasn't able to understand that, it wasn't worth spending any more time on it from my perspective, because I wasn't going to be able to convince him. Typically, he would talk to his peers, oh, typically you give up 5 to 10% of your company. Well, okay, great. That means you have all the skills to go do it. Go do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you run into. And so sometimes they have to just go down the path themselves. Sometimes they're very willing to listen from day one. And, we had a researcher come in here from Duke, actually, and I will point out this person, Lucinda Camrus from Camrus Vision. She has some unique technology, medical device for late-stage glaucoma, and she was winning SBIR grants, was slowly building her team, but really couldn't get over some of the key commercialization hurdles. We had an executive in residence program here where we match up serial entrepreneurs and senior business people with our various companies. And we had one that came out of the ophthalmology space that brought LASIK to market, and he was able to quickly put the various pieces in place that were missing and the business proposition in place to move the company forward, and he came on as CEO, and now the company's been able to raise a Series A and looks like it's really going to have a true shot on goal. I think as an entrepreneur and having a PhD in biomedical engineering, and this is technology that's been in her family for 30 years, she could have easily said, no, I'm the only one to run this company, and if she did, she would have taken that technology to her grave and unlikely would have never commercialized it. But she recognized where she had weaknesses, and she was willing to cede control, at least from a corporate structural perspective, not a stock perspective, to move the company in the appropriate way forward. And I think it's great when that happens.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Neha, I'm going to let you have a round of final comments before we adjourn.
Thank you so much, Andy and Russell, for taking out time to speak with us. This has been one of the more different webinars that we've had in this series, and I'm sure that we always had these questions regarding the startup formations coming out of universities and some of the interesting bioincubators that have cropped up across several cities, including New York, actually. So thank you so much for giving us an insight into this, and I'm sure some of our listeners will agree with me that this was very, very insightful. So thanks again, everyone, and thanks, Claudia, for joining us. And yeah, over to you, Joanne.
Claudia, would you like to go next?
Yeah, it's just I very much enjoyed the presentation, and really the work that First Flight is doing is really so critical to help these technologies be realized to really satisfy customer needs. So I look forward to maybe hearing an update in some future time as to progress and things that you're doing.
Andy, would you like to go next?
Well, thank you for letting us participate today. This is obviously a topic that Russell and I are very passionate about. We argue about this on a daily basis. We beat each other up, we beat other people up, but generally what we try to do is be very supportive. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all for any of this. It's very dependent upon the situation, people's backgrounds, and I think helping them decide and understand where they fit best is the best value proposition that we can offer. We're a nonprofit, and our goal is to build more successful science-based companies.
Russell, I'm going to let you have the final word. Thank you, Andy.
Hey, Joanne, thank you very much. It is an important topic. And thank you for the opportunity to let us just kind of go through it and give our perspective. And we hope that in the individuals, listening to the webinar today and individuals who review the slides afterwards, just as inventors, just take the time to think about your skill sets and how your skill sets can support and integrate into a science-based startup. The notion of going and becoming a co-founder, becoming the startup CEO versus being a scientific advisor to the company, or just simply being the inventor and letting the company develop its own science team and run and go commercialize the opportunity. There's all types of successful paths here, and finding the one that best suits the inventor's point in life, their skill sets, can just really optimize the opportunity for success. Thank you.
Well, beautifully put, and I really appreciate this presentation as well. I've been around this world for some time, and you do a beautiful job of really articulating the value of that whole continuum of the inventor and the entrepreneur, and also demonstrate that it is the rare person that has both factors. I'm already getting ideas for opportunities to invite you all back, so we'll be chatting about that. I want to thank our audience. We appreciate you being here and appreciate your questions, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.